Natasha. It doesn't make me any less nervous that you made me sound so fantastic, and I don't feel that fantastic. It's funny, I was thinking today, if you would have told me 10-ish years ago, when I was going to Linguistics Colloquium as an undergraduate student, that I would someday be talking at a Linguistics Colloquium, I would have never believed you. So, as Natasha said, I'm at the University of Alberta. I've been there long enough for my vowels to sort of shift. I started accommodating. I do a little bit of Canadian raising in there. But part of the reason to come down was to do some work with Natasha. That was I came down on Monday, and we've been working on things. And secretly, the other reason to come was to give myself some time to get my vowels shifted back to an Arizona dialect before I had to talk before a group of people. I don't know that I've succeeded. We'll see. So before I get into this, I just want to recognize some collaborators. This is work that I've been doing with Harold Biden, Michelle Sims, who's a graduate student of mine, and Terry Neary, who's one of my colleagues as well. And it's funded by SURE, which is like the NSF of Canada. So as a phonetician, there always has to be some sort of sound at the beginning, right? It's always interesting. And what I want to do is I'm going to play this for you, and I just want to talk about kind of how we put together a message.
I think I would rather live the poverty lifestyle than have to admit that I failed and move into my mom's basement.
Let me play it one more time for those of you who might not have gotten this.
I think I would rather live the poverty lifestyle than have to admit that I failed and move into my mom's basement.
Okay, so this is a spontaneous conversation. This guy's talking to somebody on the phone. If I probably know a little bit more about this guy than I should ethically, but I believe he's a musician, if I remember correctly. And so there's this conversation about failing and these things. And one of the things that I want to point out is as you listen to the this speech statement, you can hear the rising and falling of the intonation. You can hear him emphasizing certain words. So he's emphasizing poverty, failed, and I hear mom's basement here emphasized as well. Okay? So I'll play it again so you can just see if you agree or disagree with me.
I think I would rather live the poverty lifestyle than have to admit that I failed and move into my mom's basement.
So you can kind of hear him emphasizing certain words, and then the others, so from what Natasha has been working on, reducing other words, not emphasizing. So one of the things that kind of drives what I'm interested in, what I want to do is this, how we take this message and how we emphasize certain words, convey meaning, and how certain words that aren't as important, perhaps, we're going to shorten them up and we're not going to put as much emphasis on them. What I want to know is, how do we do that? Why do we do that? And what's driving this? Okay. Now there's.
I think I would rather live the poverty lifestyle than have to admit that I failed and move into my mom's basement.
So for that enough. So there's this theory out there. This guy named Bjorn Lindblom. He calls it H&H theory, or hypo and hyper articulation theory. Okay. Basic idea here is. It's pretty simple, right? Where the goal is to convey a message, and you convey that message as easily for me, okay, spending as little energy as possible for you to hear and to understand. Okay? So as a speaker, I know certain things about this message that I want to convey, and I know where I can shorten things up, and I know where I really need to emphasize, because that needs to be clear for you to understand. Okay, so the first point I have here is to convey a message so listeners can hear it, and the second point is produce a message as efficiently as possible. Okay, so there's a bit of a tension between these two things, and I'm trying to balance that tension. Now there's a couple of hypotheses about, or maybe better said, that might possibly be driving some of this tension that we find in H&H. Okay, so one is the smooth signal redundancy hypothesis. Okay, and this comes from work by Eilert and Turk. And basically, you can think of this as if something is redundant within the context of the speaking environment, that thing is going to be reduced. We're going to put less emphasis on it, and we're not going to use it as much. Okay? So here, the speaker's maximizing ease of articulation. The speaker maximizes the signal for the listener. It's somewhat like this H&H theory in some ways. One of the things that they do here is they use frequency and probability to predict where this redundancy is going to occur. So things that are going to be really high frequency are things that are going to be reduced in whatever the context of that speech is. Okay? And things that are low frequency or don't occur very often in that conversation, those are going to be the ones that are going to be emphasized. Okay? Now, this is probably impossible to, the picture is probably impossible to see here, but Krupperman and some colleagues in 2007 had this question about compound morphemes, and these compound morphemes in Dutch. So in Dutch, you can take two constituents and you can put them together, and you're going to use one of these morphemes. And now what they did is they looked at the duration of these morphemes, and they looked to see what was happening in terms of what they called a paradigm. Okay, and a paradigm is, you have, in this particular example, you have S. Okay, I'm not going to pronounce the Dutch because I'll be embarrassed because I know Natasha will tell me I'm wrong. Okay, so we have sheepdog here. So I'm taking sheep and dog. I'm sticking an S in between to join my compound. Okay, and then I can create kind of a family or a paradigm of sheep words that get this S. Okay, and what they found was these interfixes that have really big families or big paradigms, the words are actually, the interfixes are actually lengthened. Okay, now the smooth signal redundancy hypothesis would say these things are really redundant because they have big families. Okay, and so they should be reduced, they should be shorter. But they're finding something opposite here that seems to not agree with the smooth signal redundancy hypothesis. Okay, and this interaction of the two, or the disagreement between these two, is what I'm trying to get at today. Okay, I've got another side question that I'm gonna squeeze in here as well, but this is kind of the main question. Okay, is it really the smooth signal redundancy hypothesis that's driving shortening and lengthening? Or do we have this paradigmatic signal enhancement hypothesis where we have paradigms, and these paradigms are actually lengthening out the sounds? I think I just said what's on the slide. Let me go back through it, just make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, so two hypotheses contradict each other. Smooth signal redundancy hypothesis predicts that we have shorter things, whereas the paradigmatic signal enhancement hypothesis predicts that sounds with high paradigmatic support, so things with lots of similar paradigms. Okay, if you have ever taken a Latin class, think of morphological paradigms in that sense. Okay, so things with lots of support paradigmatically should cause those morphemes to be longer. Okay, now what I want to talk about today is English irregular verbs. Okay, English irregular verbs are special in that it gives us an opportunity to look at a specific vowel where all the morphology rhymes. Okay, so if we have a pairing like sing and sang, the morphology is just hanging right there in that vowel. Okay, so that vowel is telling us this is a past tense form or this is a present tense form. Okay, so if the vowels are carrying all the tense meaning, then we should be able to figure out paradigms for these vowels in some form or other. And we should be able to look and see, okay, if the paradigmatic signal enhancement hypothesis is true, then we should see this lengthen. Okay? If it's not true, then we expect them to get shorter when they're in a more frequent environment. Okay, when they're occurring more frequently. So, just just a note here about paradigms. There are a lot of different ways that we could figure out paradigms. So one way would be to take sing and sang, ring and ring, and count all the E to A alternations in the vowel pairings and say, okay, this is a paradigm. This is a group of alternations. Okay, so you could have, this is why I write an example, because I can't ever think of them when I'm on the spot. Any other irregular verb that you could dream of, they would fit into this. We could count those and that would give us games. And in fact, when we started doing this, we tried that, and it didn't work really well. It just was, it ended up being more confusing, I think, than anything. So this is where I have my or. Okay. Now, this is kind of a complicated or, and we'll spend a little bit of time talking about it. The other alternative is we can take what I'm going to call a learning approach here and think about how speakers might learn this vowel alternation. Okay, and how a learner of language, which all of us are, and we're all constantly learning new things about language. Okay, how would a learner map this vowel sound to the morphological relationship? Okay, and what we're going to do, what I'm going to do here is I explain this. Is I'm going to talk about a kind of a mathematical principle in psychology that we're going to apply to quantify this mapping. Okay. So, how are we going to quantify this? Well, what we want to do is we want to find this mapping from form to the meaning. So the form in this case is going to be the vowel, and the meaning in this case is going to be that past tense or present tense meaning. Okay? So in production, what we mean here is that there's some sort of activation, that connection between the two. Okay, with the given form or meaning has something to do with, you can think of it as an articulatory gesture, you can think of it as any number of things. Okay? And I'll talk a little bit how we quantify that. So each gesture in this particular instance is going to receive some sort of proportional support. Okay? Each sound in the word is going to get a little bit of support, okay, in terms of its connections, or each gesture within that's being produced. It's going to receive some sort of support. And that support is going to be, and what we want to do is we want to find the proportional support for the vowel to the tense meaning. Okay? If that didn't make sense, I'm going to explain. Let me give you a little bit of background. What we're going to do is, I'm going to use this naive discriminative learning package. It's an R package. It was implemented by Alberta and Buckeye in 2011, so fairly recently. They've implemented this and published a paper on reading using this method in this other paper here. I'll talk a little, I'm going to borrow one of their figures here to illustrate this. So the main elements of this kind of model are the cues. We've already talked about cues, so these could be phonemes or diphones. And in this case, I'm actually going to be talking about diphones. The outcomes, these could be meanings, so some sort of semantic meaning. This could be a morphological meaning, as we're going to use in this particular case. Okay, and then weighted connections. This is going to be the connection between the cue and the meaning. And there's some sort of strength of connection is what we're going to calculate here. And what we're going to do is, to calculate this connection, is we're going to use these equilibrium equations that come from this guy named David Danks. And these equations are based on a learning model put forward, I think it was in the 70s by Restore and Wagner. Okay. It's a really interesting learning model based on animal learning and human learning. Okay. So we're going to take that and we're going to try and apply that here and see if it does something in terms of predicting what's going on in terms of these vowels. So just another way to look at this, this figure comes from Buckey's paper. Okay, so here we have our form. What I mean, again, here by form is these are going to be our articulatory gestures or phonemes, or in this case we have diphones. Okay, and these things are going to be mapped to some sort of semantic meaning. Okay, so we have perhaps a semantic meaning. We have something about whether it's an agent or a recipient. We could have any number of things in terms of the semantics there. Those things are going to be mapped. And what we want to calculate is the weight or the strength of these connections. And in some ways, this maybe feels a little bit like the connections in the model. So let me go through the process of what we did to generate this thing. I just noticed that my citations, that our packages changed. Because Peter Millen helped them on a later version. And I've updated here and forgot it on the other slide. Okay, so the first step here is we want to calculate the weights from cues to the relevant tense passed out, tense outcomes. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a corpus of some sort of speech. In this particular case, we're using a Buckeye corpus. And I'm going to take all of my diphone pairs, and I'm going to map them to a semantic meaning, and I'm going to calculate using these equations that we've talked about some sort of weights. So the connection between that cue and the relevant tense meaning. Okay. And we're going to use the citation transcription and the observed transcription. I'm going to come back to this and talk about this in a little bit. Okay, so once we get these weights, what we're going to do is we're going to sum the weights for the vowel diphones. Okay, so if I have some sort of given verb, I'm going to take that to create S1. I'm going to take the CV. So if my example is sing, it's going to be E. Is my first diphone, and then I'm going to take the second diphone, the E and the boom. Okay, and I'm going to calculate the weight of those two. Okay. I'm going to then sum the weights for the entire word. So sing is maybe a bad example because well, we still have two more diphones here. We've got the word boundary and the S and the boom and the word boundary. Okay, so I'm going to get a total weight for the word and how it maps to tense. Okay, and then I'm going to get the proportion by simply dividing the two. Okay, so how much is that the pair of vowel diphones contributing to the tense meaning of this particular thing. Okay, so we're going to run through all the words in the corpus, and we're going to calculate all these weights, and we're going to get this really pretty number that tells us the relationship between this vowel and past or present tense. Okay. So we'll calculate these activations, and now once we have these weightings or these activations, we can use these as a predictor. We can try and create a model, a statistical model, to figure out what's going on in the duration of these vowels. Okay. So, this is hopefully obvious. If I've done my job, this should be obvious. Okay? So, based on the paradigmatic signal enhancement hypothesis, this vowel cue to tense activation should show longer durations or stronger activation. So the stronger the activation is between the vowel and the tense meaning, then I should have longer durations because this connection, these connections, these meanings are showing that it has stronger paradigmatic support. Okay, so this vowel maps really strongly then to this particular tense meaning. Okay. However, based on slew signal redundancy hypothesis, this cue to tense activation, which is in part kind of a frequency measure, okay? Because it's taking, and it's essentially one of the things it does when we count these initial weights, is the weights become stronger the more times the vowel occurs in that particular environment. Okay, so in a way, this is taking into account frequency. Then we would expect that higher activation or stronger activation would give us shorter vowel duration. So we have competing durations here. So as I mentioned already, we use the Buckeye corpus. The Buckeye corpus is spontaneous. It's a corpus of spontaneous conversation. It's interview conversation. So there was an interviewer who was in the know, and his or her job was to take you into a room, give you a microphone, and ask you a couple of questions and try and get you to talk for 20 minutes to half an hour about different kinds of questions. It could be sports, it could be where you grew up, it could be any number of things. Okay, so on a kind of formality scale, it's not as informal as you talking to your mother or father, perhaps, but it's going to be spontaneous and connected and more informal than, say, what I'm producing right now. Okay. In the corpus, we have 40 speakers, 20 of them are male, 20 of them are female. It's unscripted interview speech, and the transcription of this is interesting from my perspective, and I'm going to take advantage of the way they do this. Okay? For the corpus, what they have is a observed phonetic transcription. This is what the speaker actually produced. So you can think of this as kind of like an allophonic transcription. So there's some allophonic information about the sounds in this particular transcription. But they also have the dictionary transcription, or what the dictionary tells you each of these words should be. Okay, so I'm making a little bit of an assumption here. I may be wrong or I may be right, but I'm assuming that the more close transcription is really a phonetic representation of what's happening, whereas this dictionary kind of representation of the word is more along the lines of phonological representation. And what we did with this then is we took both of these representations and we calculated the weights for both the observed and the dictionary transcription. So using both of them as my cues, and we calculated those weights. And what we can do in a few steps here, and I think that's the second area to investigate, is we can compare the two models and see which one better predicts the data, which better fits the model. Okay? So I actually have a hypothesis here specifically that the phonetic data should actually give me a better fit than the phonological data. And this is based on some work that I did on the on T allophones, where we find something that seems to indicate that the phonetics map better to what's in the what's actually happening, and that the model and modeling what's happening than in the phonology. Okay. So we'll test this as well. This is my side question. This side question is okay. So what we did is we took this corpus and we extracted all the verbs from the corpus that were monosyllabic. Okay. So we just want monosyllabic verbs because we only want one vowel. Their other vowels are going to be the same and complicated. So we're trying to simplify the problem. Even excuse me. I got a bold. It's a fantastic welcome back. So even though we limited it to monosyllabic verbs, we still found 12 valued verbs, which is not something to say. So we have a little bit of data here to play with, and we separated them between irregular verbs and regular verbs. So you want to compare it. I want to compare in my first analysis these regular and irregular verbs, just to see. I mean, if I'm completely up the creek with this, then I shouldn't see any difference between the two. One of the things we did, though, is with our regular verbs, we only took pairs like sing and sang with vowel alternating. Things like wept, so we have weep, wept. The vowel alternates, but we're also adding that alveolar stop consonant at the end, which is also going to contribute to the morphology, the past tense, to the meaning or to the form. To the tense. Okay, so we're going to exclude those for now. We're not going to compare it all to that. Okay, and then what we did is we calculated, or we extracted the duration of each vowel in the corpus. So we had these durations of all these vowels. And that allowed us to look at these and try to statistically model or come up with a way to look at this. Now what I'm going to show you, I'll do this first. Okay. So the first step was to create an analysis of both the regular and irregular verbs. Now, the reason to do this, I think I mentioned already, is we want to see if we can find differences between the regular and irregular just to see see if they're doing something different. Right? And then once we've done this, we want to look specifically at the vowel Q tense activation and see if it's actually predicting that in some way or other, if it actually predicts the duration of the verbs. It's entirely possible that it's not going to do anything, but I wouldn't be talking about it for so long if it doesn't do it. Right? I would look without a presentation. Okay. So I'm just going to mention this briefly. We use a statistical modeling technique called generalized additive models. This is part of the generalized linear model family. And the key advantage of doing this method is that it allows us to model within surfaces. Okay, so something like some sort of linear model, the assumption is that we're fitting a straight line to data. Okay, those linear models we can put in regular surfaces to try and fit the data. The difficulty there is that we're guessing. So let's say I have data that kind of curves like this, right? And I know that it's curved and it's doing something that's not linear. Okay? So I want to try and fit that. So I'm going to fit that by eye. So I'm going to create some sort of restricted cube spline or something that fits that pretty well. But I'm essentially making guesses as to what I think fits well. And I'm eyeing it and saying, okay, that fits the data pretty well, so I think this is probably a good number of knots in my restricted spline to fit this. Okay. What GAM lets us do is it does that automatically for us. It finds the best function, that smooth function to fit that wiggly data. And since this data was wiggly, we decided that GAM was probably going to be the best way to do it. Okay. The rest of this is just word and speaker random effects factors, and just in case you've read the maximal paper, which I think is really popular right now, we also did test for random slopes. We have random slopes for phrase rates. That's what this other box means. If you don't understand what any of this means, don't worry about it. It just means that hopefully the statistics are correct. Other predictors that we put in the model was vowel quality. So English vowels are renowned for the vowel quality differences. We have lax vowels and tense vowels. In this particular case, we only have lax and tense vowels. Diphthongs could also be classified there, but the diphthongs are not statistically different from the tense vowels, so we push them together to combine them. Okay, we also have our tense. This is one of our important predictors. So past versus present. Regularity, whether it's a regular verb or an irregular verb. We have phrase rate. This has been statistically centered on itself. This is calculated based on syllables per second. We've calculated the local frequency, so we calculated the frequency within the Buckeye frequency. Okay? And this is residualized. So we basically try to get the effect of the frequency and subtract out the effect of any kind of flexible frequency. So we have really just a local measure of how often things are occurring. Okay. And then we have this proportion of Q to tense activation, the thing that I spent so much time talking about. Are there any questions now? I feel like I would do that really fast. If something's not clear, we'll make sure it's clear. So we just want to be interesting stuff. So here's what we found. Let me explain this for you just in a second. These are just box plots of the averages, just to show you the general effect. I'm not going to show you all the statistical outputs and everything. You'll have to just trust me that these are significant. Okay. So what we see in this particular box plot is the irregular verbs with the lax vowels, the shorter of the vowels. And then what this one is going to be is going to be our regular verbs with the lax vowels. Then we have our irregular tense vowels and our regular tense vowels. Okay. What you see is an interaction, a really nice interaction here in lax vowels, when they go from irregular to regular, are actually longer. Okay? And our tense vowels, when we go to irregular to regular, are shorter. Okay? So they're having different kinds of irregular and the regular having different kind of effect on our tense and lax verbs, which is a little bit exciting. One, it tells me that both regular and irregular vowels are doing something different. Okay, so I get a little bit of justification to maybe separate them. Now let me spend a little bit of time on this particular plot. The other thing I like about PMs is you get pretty plots reading. So this is a contour plot. So if you've ever used, if you've ever gone hiking and you've used a contour map, that's essentially what this is. Okay, the spaces where there's white stuff, those are spaces where there's no data to support the model. Okay, the data just isn't there in the data set that we have. Okay, and what we have here is, let me get the axes here. So we have phrase rate. So this is how fast we're speaking. This first particular plot, so on our x-axis here, is the local frequency, how frequent it is in Corpus. And then what you see essentially on the, if I'm a good Canadian, I would say a z-axis. Okay? What we see on our z-axis is the duration of the vowels. Okay? So as we get more green, the vowels get shorter. Okay, so this is a log duration of vowels. So I don't know if you can see this, but this is minus 1.5 and this is minus 4. So I have shorter vowels here and longer vowels here. Okay, so it's like I'm walking down a hill, okay, as I go this direction. Okay, and then the two plots here, we have our lax vowels and our tense vowels. Because we know from that previous plot that lax vowels and tense vowels seem to be doing something different. And top and bottom, these are my phrase final vowels, and these are my non-phrase final vowels. The reason we separated those out is because we know that phrase final, and I think I forgot to mention this as one of my predictors, we know that phrase finally we lengthen things. Things get longer at the end of words. Okay? Which is what you can, if you can really see the numbers here, you can see that the not phrase final ones are actually shorter than the phrase final ones. Okay, the other thing that we see is as I'm going to use the contour map metaphor here just to walk through this literally. Okay, as I walk through my plot, right, as I increase my phrase rate, so as I talk faster, okay, I'm walking downhill, my vowels get shorter. Okay, so the faster I talk, the shorter my vowels get. I don't think that's surprising in any way, shape, or form. As I walk towards higher frequency sounds, what we see here is at this edge I'm walking downhill. It flattens out here in the middle frequencies, and at the higher frequencies I start walking downhill again. Okay, so what we're seeing here for this phrase final stuff is at the edges where I have low frequency and high frequency things, I get a really strong effective frequency. But in the middle, the phrase final lengthening just washes out any kind of frequency. It's only for those things on the edges where we see that the frequency effect is strong frequency effect. Okay. Now with the non-phrasal ones, non-phrase final ones, the effect is relatively simple and straightforward. As we increase in frequency, okay, the durations just get shorter. Okay, essentially a simple main effect. Okay, the frequencies get shorter. And the phrase rate effect is the same. Okay, and it doesn't matter if it's a lax or tense vowel on either of these plots. But it's going to matter on our next plot. And this is the one where things start to get really exciting. Okay? So everything's set up the same except we have Q to tense activation. Okay? For Q to tense activation, phrase finally, not a whole, well, it's the same thing's happening in both the lax and the tense vowels. Okay, we're not so excited about that, but what we see here is that for our lax vowels, we increase in our activation. So the more morphologically active we are for past or present tense, the shorter the vowel is. Okay? But for the tense vowels, we're going to do the opposite thing. Okay? So as we increase in activation for the tense vowels, the longer we get. So let me just summarize here. So our local frequency, which I'm thinking of, is essentially kind of a topicality measure, right? So how topical or how frequently does it happen in this set of conversations is predicted. Thus, as frequency increases, duration decreases. This actually, I didn't have this as one of my predictions, but this fits pretty well with this signal redundancy hypothesis, right? So the more redundant it is in the conversation, the shorter it gets. It's pretty nice. We talked about this already. The duration of lax vowels is longer for regular verbs, but the duration of tense vowels is shorter. So we see regular and irregular verbs doing something different in this environment. The last bit I want to summarize here is this interaction between the vowel quality and the tense activation. Okay? So we saw two things. The lax vowels got longer as the activation increased. The lax vowels get shorter as the activation increases. Now, there might be two explanations here. So perhaps the learners are emphasizing the difference in vowel quality to help convey tense. Right? So I want to emphasize that this is a tense vowel by using a longer duration. And that helps my listener distinguish the morphological frequency as well. Okay? And I do the same thing for the left. So I actually make it shorter so that I emphasize the fact that this is a short lax vowel. So that you have this additional cue as a listener that this is a lax vowel and you can process it, that tense more easily. Okay? Or it might be that regular verbs may be causing the lax and tense vowels to behave differently. So we need to separate out the regular and irregular verbs and do another analysis. So if we remove the regular verbs, then we get a different picture. I hope so. Okay? So the vowels in the irregular verbs really should be the ones that are carrying the tense. The regular verbs are the ones where all the actions take place. Okay. So we should see a stronger effect of this tense effort, this learning predictor. So again, this is all the same. Generalized additive modeling. We have the random effects and we have complex random effect structure. It's almost identical to the previous one. There's one more predictor here. I'm not going to talk about. But I'm going to jump right into the important part of the model. Okay, so we're going to talk about local frequency and tense activation. This plot should be relatively familiar. We see that this frequency effect actually changes slightly for our regular verbs. For lower phrase rates, okay, we generally get a pattern of shortening duration. The vowels get shorter. But for the higher phrase rates, as we increase in frequency, the vowels actually get really getting shorter. Okay? Look at that backwards again. Getting longer. So I'm going from 3.5 to 3 to the 2.5 area. So the vowels here are getting longer. Okay. The other plot going to the right, this is a plot of a partial effect. Okay, all that means is this is a plot of, if I take the intercept of my linear model and I add this is what the model predicts should be happening. Okay, so what you can take this to mean is as cue to tense activation increases, the duration of the vowel should be getting longer. Okay, so as we increase that duration, that vowel is going to get longer. So going to pause for a minute, and I'm going to go to that phonetics phonology question. Okay? So, remember I talked about the phonetic transcription, the dictionary, the phonological transcription. Okay, so we did an additional model. It's the exact same model as the one that I just showed, where I showed you that graph. Okay? And the only difference is I swapped out the Q activation predictor. Okay? And I used the Q activation predictor for the dictionary form. I also call it canonical somewhere in here as well. Okay? And what I'm going to use is this Akaika information criterion to compare the two models. All this measure is it's a way to say how well is the data fitting, or how well is the model fitting. So a lower AIC score means it's fitting better. The lower it is, the better it fits. Okay? So for the observed or the phonetic form, we get an AIC score of 50-50, whereas for the canonical or phonological form, we get a score of 50-69. Now there's a little bit of math we can do to calculate how many times one model is more likely than the other model. Okay? And this gives us crazy big numbers. So the two models, if I compare the two models, the phonetic model is, what is that, 13,359 times more likely than the other model. Okay? So another way of saying this is the phonetic model fits the data a lot better than the morphological model. Okay? And if we can statistically compare the two using the ANOVA, and we will find that they're statistically different. Okay, significantly so. Okay. So that's this side, and now I'm going to go back to the summary here of what we're finding in this second study. So, using the phonetic form provides a better model than the assumed phonological form. We just covered that. For the low phrase rate duration, we see a decrease in vowel duration as frequency increases. But for the high phrase rate duration, for the high phrase rate vowels, the duration increases as frequency decreases. Did I get that right? I'm totally questioning myself on this one. I don't know why. Phrase rates, local frequency as frequency increases, and decrease in duration for low phrase rate. And for high phrase rate, we increase in duration. Yeah. I don't know why I'm questioning myself. Okay, the other thing that we see is, really the important thing, and the thing I want to talk about is, or focus on to a certain extent, is Q to tense activation corresponds to log the vowel duration. Okay, for both our tense and black style. Okay, so we don't get in that the first model we didn't have this nice interaction between the Q to tense activation and lax and tense vowels. That interaction is going to occur in a second. Now, thus far we've only considered durations. I did a lot of work on just the duration of vowels. But durational mode does not make a vowel. Okay? There are a lot of other things, or a lot of other components to a vowel that we're hearing, more than just duration. So we have phonemic frequencies, we have pitch, and we have intensity. Okay? All of these deserve to be investigated in their own right to a certain extent from this perspective. So we really understand what's going on in these vowels and producing them to convey this tense meaning. Okay, this is where my graduate student, Michelle Sims, comes in. She spent about a year of her life measuring formants for all 12, well, no, she only did the irregular verbs. Okay, so she only did the irregular verbs, so it's only about 6,000 vowels. Only. Okay. And it says hot out of the oven, which means I got this figure on Tuesday and I saw it for the very first time on Tuesday. Okay? I've seen pots like this before, but this is the first model plot of the data. Okay, and let me walk you through this one. Okay, this is a plot of the first formant against the second formant. Okay, those are the two acoustic resonant characteristics that we use to distinguish vowels in terms of whether it's an E or an A. Okay, and what you see here, this is our E vowel. This is going to be A, this will be A, and the gray one over here is going to be Oo. Okay, so we have E, A, Oo. So it's flipped in inverse. This is the right mathematical way to plot vowels. All phoneticians like to flip it around so that it's the equation. I didn't do that, sorry. We have male speakers in these two plots, female speakers in these two plots. And we have past tense vowels and present, past and present. Okay? It's backwards, present and past. I stayed up till 1 Friday about this morning. So our present vowels are here and our past vowels are here. So if I show you, there's I don't know if you can see this, but there's an X here at the beginning of this black line. And over the course of the vowel, what I'm plotting here is the movements of the vowel as I do so. Now, if you had a phonetics class, I hope you learned about formant transitions. So the consonants on either side, they affect the characteristics of the formants and the vowels. So the real important cue to the consonant identity, we cut those out. Okay, so what you're seeing is just, if I remember, it's 25% to 75% or somewhere close to that. So we try to cut as much of that out. Okay, and you see generally this is across all 40 speakers and all this. We see this nice general pattern where E moves further to the periphery of the vowel space. We see it moving here further in to the periphery. Oo in the males in the present tense is really cool. Okay, Oo starts here. This is where it's if you look at the plots, Oo is more like an E. It's in Ohio English, it's so far forward, it's like a front vowel, around the front vowel. But what happens, and what's cool about this plot is we see it moving back to where it should be as a back vowel. Okay, so it's moving back to the periphery. Okay. So E and U are both tense vowels. Which one is this? I'm right up next to this and I can't read this together. So here we have, okay, the last vowels, what we see is the last vowels are moving more towards the center of the vowel space. Tense vowels are moving out, last vowels seem to be moving in. Okay? And the way or the direction in which they move is actually different, statistically different, between the present and past tense. Okay? So we've made a first attempt at statistically modeling this, and these are statistically different, the way they move in the past and present tense. So we're finding these effects not just in the completion of the vowel, but we're finding in the performance patterns. The initial data seems to indicate we're going to find patterns in pitch and intensity. Hopefully we can make sense of the patterns. But we seem to be finding patterns. Now, what I didn't mention is we have a whole lot of other predictors that I haven't talked about in this model. We controlled for just about everything we could think of, and we did, even though we cut out the formant transitions, we put the preceding consonant and the following consonant. We used to model those predictors to control those out, just in case they were having other effects on the vowels. Okay. And the hasn't even cooled off yet part basically means this is work in progress. So as we work on this and we learn more about what's going on here, the results might be a little bit different than what I just explained. Okay. But this is an area where we really need to look more at. But like I already said, the initial results are really encouraging. We see form and movement patterns even in the spontaneous speech. This is actually a big deal. There's a whole domain of research on how monophthongs move, and that movement of vowel and expected change. It's only ever been tested in really carefully produced speech with just H vowel D words or B vowel B words, and I think D vowel B words. The only environments this has ever been tested in and shown in, and just recently, us and one other guy have shown that we get these effects also in spontaneous speech. Okay. When all else is controlled, we see the effects of tense on form and patterns. Okay, so the tense, past versus present seems to be having an effect. But a lot more analysis is still necessary. So I spent all this time talking about this cue to tense activation. That's not in this model yet. That's one of the things we need to do today. Okay, so my general summary is that I start to wrap up here. Okay, measures based on actual pronunciation, so the phonetics are better predictors than measures based on the canonical or lexical representations. That's phonology. Proportional cue to tense activation measures are predictive of vowel duration, and even though this proportional cue to tense activation still has, it kind of has frequency embedded in it, we're still finding effects of vocal frequency in our analysis. Okay, so if you're phonologist, you might be asking yourself this question: why not phonology? I'm going to kind of sidestep the question. Okay, in a way, what I'm going to say is using this naive discriminative learning really, I think, may emphasize on. They do a better job emphasizing the distributional properties of the phonetic details, okay, and more so than it does on some sort of abstract form, okay. So it really allows us to capture the components of the phonetic detail, but possibly the role of the abstract form just is not captured in this method of calculating the relationship. So I'm not saying that there is no phonology. I'm just saying this predictor doesn't let us see the effects of the phonology. Okay? So, we had two hypotheses right at the beginning that we said were competing. I'm going to be sneaking so that they're both right. Okay? I set them up as competing and then we say they're both right. So, for us, both hypotheses are relevant, and what's happening is the two things are interacting in certain ways in speech, such that we get the effects that we're finding. So if we come back to H&H theory, okay, we see durational shortening when the items are redundant. So when they're high frequency, they're used a lot. And then when they're high frequency, then the information is going to be smaller. However, this has to interact with this morphological information, which actually lengthens the vowels for strong tense activation. So we're getting this kind of relationship of interaction between the two. Now, as with most research, there's still a really important question to be asked. Spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure out, and what we're thinking about yet, what's going on in the production of these things. The question that really, I think, remains is, okay, we can find things that are happening in the production, but does it really matter when we hear the sounds? Okay? So we might do this when we're producing speech, but you as a listener can care less. Okay? So the next step is to take what we learned about the vowels, manipulate that. Okay? So if you're taking like speech technology class, you learn how to change the form and frequencies of the vowels and change the duration of the vowels. Okay? So we're going to manipulate those, and then the listeners hear them. Okay? Ask them to do some sort of behavioral task, or maybe try and be fancy and do something like hear repeat, and see if that affects perception and processing. Okay? Right, that's all I have. Thank you.